Have you ever discovered that the people who call themselves your family had already decided you no longer belonged? Not because you betrayed them, not because you hurt them, but simply because your life didn't fit the picture they wanted everyone else to see. I never imagined that one single message, would expose decades of hidden resentment, lies, and betrayal. My name is Erica Hale. I'm 34 years old, a CPA, and a single mother to the most incredible 8-year-old girl in the world, my daughter, Daisy. Until that summer, I believed I already knew exactly who my family was. I was wrong. Because while I was painting tiny white daisies on my daughter's fingernails during her birthday celebration, my own family was quietly erasing us from theirs. Daisy sat across from me at our small kitchen table, smiling so brightly that the entire apartment felt warmer. Our birthday decorations came from the dollar store. The cake had come from the grocery bakery. The balloons weren't expensive. Nothing about our celebration looked impressive. Yet Daisy looked around our tiny living room and whispered, "Mom, this is the best birthday ever." Those words filled every empty place inside my heart. I smiled. "If this is the best birthday ever," I teased. "Then next year, we'll make it even better," she giggled. "You always do." Those 4 simple words meant more than any compliment I'd ever received, because unlike the rest of my family, my daughter had never measured love by money. She measured it by effort, by kindness, by who stayed. I had barely finished painting the last flower on her thumbnail when my phone vibrated. Once, twice, 10 times, 20 times. By the time I picked it up, there were 41 unread messages inside our family group chat. Something was happening. I opened it, and instantly, everything inside me went cold. At the very top of the conversation was a pinned announcement from my mother, Lorraine Hale. She had always loved making public announcements, especially the kind designed to humiliate someone. Her message read, "I'm so excited to celebrate my 60th birthday surrounded by the children who have made me proud." Then she listed every single guest. My brother Kyle, his wife, their children, my sister Vanessa, her husband Grant, their kids, our cousins, neighbors, church friends, the pastor, family friends, even people who weren't actually related to us. But there was one name missing, mine. Daisy. For 1 second, I honestly thought it had to be an accident, until I reached the final sentence. "Every one of my children made me proud." A pause. Then, except Erica, she chose to become a lowly single mother. I stared at those words, not because they surprised me, because they didn't. My mother had spent years reminding me that raising my daughter alone somehow made me less valuable than everyone else. What shocked me was that she'd finally said it publicly. Then something even worse happened. Vanessa reacted with a little red heart. Just a heart. Nothing else. My brother stayed silent. My cousins stayed silent. My aunts stayed silent. One by one, people who had eaten meals at my table, people I'd helped when they needed money, people whose taxes I prepared for free, watched the message, read it, and chose silence. Not one person defended me. Not one. I kept staring as the little typing bubbles appeared, then disappeared, again and again. Everyone had something to say, just not to me. I slowly locked my phone and placed it face down on the couch. Daisy looked up. "Mom? Yeah, sweetheart? Do you like my flowers?" I smiled despite the lump growing in my throat. "They're the prettiest nails in the whole county," she beamed. And in that moment, I made myself a promise. My daughter would never carry the weight of my family's cruelty. Never. Some people spend their entire lives trying to earn love from people who decided years ago not to give it. I had stopped trying. Not because I stopped caring. Because I finally realized something. You can't convince someone to value you if disrespecting you benefits their pride. My mother had spent decades keeping score: the successful children, the married children, the wealthy children, the children who looked good in family photos. I never fit that picture. After my divorce, I became the reminder of everything she feared. A woman raising a child alone. She called it failure. I called it survival. Because while everyone else was busy judging me, I was building a life, quietly. One paycheck at a time, one client at a time, one sleepless night at a time. The next morning, before sunrise, I unlocked the glass door to my accounting office above the old hardware store downtown. It wasn't glamorous. One room, one desk, a coffee maker older than some of my clients, a space heater that barely worked, 3 regular customers. That was it. But every dollar inside that office, I had earned honestly. No handouts, no inheritance, no husband, no rescue, just work. I became a CPA while raising Daisy alone. After putting her to bed every night, I'd study until 2 in the morning, sometimes with a baby monitor beside my textbooks, sometimes crying from exhaustion, but I finished. Because I wanted my daughter to grow up seeing that difficult wasn't the same thing as impossible. My family never celebrated any of that. To them, I was simply the lowly single mom. Funny thing about accountants, people only remember us when they're in trouble. And my family had forgotten just how many times I'd quietly saved them. 4 years earlier, Vanessa's medical billing business had nearly collapsed. She had mixed payroll money with personal expenses until her books became a disaster. She was weeks away from bankruptcy. I spent 2 weekends rebuilding everything. Saving her business, saving her credit, saving her future. She thanked me once, then pretended it never happened. That was our family's math. My help disappeared. My mistakes lasted forever. As I wiped condensation from my office window that morning, one name kept replaying inside my mind. Grant, Vanessa's husband. Lately my mother mentioned him constantly. Grant is helping with investments. Grant understands business. Grant is handling my finances now. Every time she said his name, something inside me tightened. Not because I disliked him, because numbers don't lie. People do. And every successful scam starts with one sentence. Trust me. I didn't know exactly what Grant was doing yet, but after years of reading financial statements, I'd learned something important. Whenever someone who loves attention suddenly wants to control someone else's money, the math rarely ends well. And for the first time, I had a feeling this wasn't just another family insult. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Something that would eventually destroy everything my mother thought she owned. And this time, I intended to keep every receipt. That evening, after dinner, Daisy sat quietly in the bathtub, making mountains out of soap bubbles. She looked up at me with those innocent brown eyes and asked the question no child should ever have to ask. Mom, why aren't we going to Grandma's birthday party? For a second, I couldn't answer. I could have lied. I could have told her we were busy. I could have invented some excuse that sounded kinder than the truth. But children always recognize lies. So I chose honesty, the gentle kind. I knelt beside the tub and smiled. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that don't always make sense. She listened carefully. Sometimes they decide their family should look a certain way. And sometimes they forget what family actually means. She stayed quiet, then asked the question that broke my heart. So, are we not real family? I brushed the wet curl away from her forehead. No, sweetheart. We're the realest family I've ever known. She smiled then. Without another second of sadness, she announced. Then we'll have our own party, with a lake, a bigger cake, and only nice people. I laughed through tears. I'd love that. That little girl had solved in 30 seconds what my mother had spent 60 years getting wrong. Love wasn't about invitations. It was about belonging. 2 days later, I drove across town to return an old casserole dish to my mother's house. The Hale family home stood proudly at the end of Ridgeline Road. White wooden walls, a deep front porch, perfect flower beds. Every board of that house had been built by my father with his own hands. To everyone else, it looked like a beautiful home. To me, it looked like a monument to appearances. My mother answered the door without inviting me inside. She barely acknowledged the casserole dish before launching into a speech about her birthday celebration. The ballroom is booked. The string quartet is confirmed. The guest list is almost 60 people now. The caterer is extraordinary. She smiled proudly, then casually added something that immediately caught my attention. Grant's handling all the finances now? I blinked. He is? She nodded proudly. He's so much better with investments than anyone else. I carefully asked, what exactly is he managing? She waved her hand dismissively. Oh, Erica, you wouldn't understand. Money isn't really your specialty. For a full second, I honestly wondered if she'd forgotten what I did for a living. I had been a licensed CPA for years. People trusted me with million-dollar tax returns. Small businesses depended on my advice. Yet somehow, my own mother believed I didn't understand money. I smiled politely, said goodbye, and walked back to my car. But inside, the numbers had already started moving. Retired widow, luxury birthday gala, professional musicians, country club ballroom, expensive decorations, private caterers, and suddenly, Grant controlling the money. Nothing about those numbers felt right. Accountants develop instincts. Sometimes the books balance perfectly, but something still feels wrong. This felt wrong, very wrong. A few days later, I ran into Grant and Vanessa at the pharmacy. Grant greeted me with his usual oversized confidence. There she is, our favorite accountant. He slapped my shoulder like we were old friends. We've been reorganizing Lorraine's investments, making her money work. I smiled. Really, I'd love to look over everything sometime. Professional curiosity. His smile froze, only for half a second, but I noticed. Then he laughed. You're not the only financial expert in this family anymore. Vanessa laughed a little too loudly, then quickly changed the subject. They walked away. But something stayed with me. People who have nothing to hide. Never panic over simple questions. That night, I couldn't stop thinking. Grant had been talking about one project for almost a year. Lakemont Ridge, a luxury housing development. According to him, it was going to transform the entire county. He mentioned it at every family dinner, every church gathering, every barbecue, every birthday. The story never changed. Only one problem. I had never seen construction. No permits. No advertisements. No equipment. Nothing. Just stories. And now, somehow, my mother's retirement money had become involved. The next morning, I finally called my mother, not to argue, just to warn her. Mom, before you sign anything else for Grant, please let me read the paperwork first. Silence. Then she answered, it's already done. Every muscle in my body tightened. What do you mean, already done? We've already opened the line of credit. I stopped breathing. A line of credit? Against what? Our house! Our house! My house, she corrected. Grant says the equity shouldn't just sit there doing nothing. I gripped my desk. Mom, please tell me you didn't borrow against Dad's house. It's called investing. You wouldn't understand. Grant says it'll double. He's putting it into Lakemont Ridge. I closed my eyes. Every accountant knows that sentence. It's an investment. It's usually spoken seconds before someone loses everything. I tried one last time. Mom, close the account. Today, I'll come over. We'll review every page together. She sighed impatiently. It's too late. The money is already moving. Then, she said the one sentence that haunted me. Your father would be ashamed of how little faith you have in family. The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone. Ashamed? If Dad were alive, he'd be asking the same questions I was. The terrible part wasn't that I suspected fraud. The terrible part was that, legally, there was almost nothing I could do. The account wasn't mine. The property wasn't mine. The signature wasn't mine. My mother was still mentally competent. She had every legal right to make terrible financial decisions, even if they destroyed everything my father built. Sometimes, watching someone walk toward disaster is far more painful than falling yourself, because you're forced to stand there, knowing exactly what's about to happen, and being completely powerless to stop it. Over the next week, the family gossip spread quickly. One aunt texted saying she felt terribly sorry, then immediately asked how expensive Mom's birthday party was. Another cousin sent a crying emoji. Nothing else. Finally, Vanessa called. Her voice sounded sweet, almost rehearsed. I just wanted to say, maybe it's better if you skip Mom's party. She's under a lot of stress. Then she laughed softly. You know how Mom is. She doesn't want everyone talking about her lowly single daughter. There it was again, that word, lowly, as if surviving life somehow made me less. I didn't argue. I simply replied, I hope Mom has a wonderful birthday. Then I hung up. Silence had become my greatest advantage, because while everyone else believed I had accepted defeat, I had already begun doing what accountants do best. Looking for receipts, looking for facts, looking for the one number nobody else bothered to question. That night, I opened a brand new spreadsheet. At the top, I typed one name, Grant Dunn. Then I whispered to myself, let's see where the money really went. And that was the night the investigation truly began. The next morning, I stopped thinking like a daughter and started thinking like an accountant. Feelings could wait, facts couldn't. I opened my laptop, created a new investigation folder, and began searching every public record I could legally access. Property records, business registrations, county filings, development permits, anything connected to one name, Grant Dunn. At first, nothing looked unusual. But experienced accountants know something important. Fraud rarely hides in what exists. It hides in what's missing. I searched for Lakemont Ridge, the luxury subdivision Grant had been bragging about for nearly a year. According to him, construction was about to begin. Investors were lining up. Property values were already climbing. But when I searched the county records, there were no permits, no subdivision approval, no engineering plans, no zoning applications. Nothing. It was as if the project had never existed. That wasn't just suspicious. It was impossible. 2 days later, something unexpected happened. My office phone rang. A frustrated man immediately started shouting. Is this Grant Dunn's office? I replied, no. You've reached Hale Ledger Accounting. There was a pause. Then he sighed. Our numbers must be mixed up again. Before hanging up, he muttered something that made my heart stop. If you talk to Grant, tell him he still owes me $11,000. I carefully asked, what was the payment for? Drywall work, Lakemont Ridge. My pulse quickened. So, construction already started? The man laughed bitterly. Construction? There isn't even any land. The option expired months ago. He keeps promising investors everything's moving, but there's nothing there. Nothing. Not a single shovel had touched the ground. After hanging up, I drove straight to the county office. An hour later, the documents confirmed everything. The land Grant claimed to own belonged to someone else. The ownership hadn't changed in over a year. Lakemont Ridge wasn't delayed. It wasn't struggling. It didn't exist. For months, Grant had been selling dreams built on land he didn't even own. I stared at the records, finally whispering one word, fraud. That evening I opened another spreadsheet. Date, source, evidence. Every phone call, every statement, every document, every contradiction. I wasn't building an argument anymore. I was building a case. A few days later, my mother invited me to what she called a healing tea. Just the women, no husbands, no children, no drama. I knew exactly what it really was. They wanted to know how much I knew. So I went. The tea was expensive. The smiles were fake. The conversation was carefully rehearsed. Then, without realizing it, my mother revealed the number We've only used 40,000. I froze. 40? She nodded. The line was approved for $80,000, borrowed against my father's home. Half of it, already gone. I finished my tea, thanked everyone politely, walked to my car, closed the door, and finally allowed myself one deep breath. This wasn't reckless investing anymore. This was financial disaster. A week before the birthday gala, my mother surprised me. She asked if she could spend an hour with Daisy at the park. I agreed, as long as I stayed nearby. Watching them together felt strange. For the first time in years, I saw my mother laugh without pretending. She pushed Daisy on the swings, fixed her jacket, smiled genuinely. Then, as she walked back toward me, she quietly said something I'd never forget. "I was you once." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" She stared into the distance. "When your father was away, I raised children alone. I remember what people called me. I remember how ashamed I felt." She swallowed hard. "And when you became a single mother, I saw my own past. I hated it." Before I could respond, she straightened her shoulders. The cold expression returned. Without another word, she got into her car and drove away. For the first time, I understood. She hadn't hated me. She hated the memory of herself. But understanding someone's pain doesn't erase the damage they cause. 3 days later, everything changed. My mother asked me to clean out my late father's storage unit. She couldn't bring herself to do it. I spent hours sorting through old tools, fishing gear, work boots, family photographs. Then, hidden beneath an old tackle box, I found a small gray lockbox. Across the top, written in my father's handwriting, was only one word: Erica. Not family. Not Lorraine. Just Erica. My hands trembled. I knew my father. He never left things unfinished. If he'd hidden this, there was a reason. 2 days later, I found the tiny key taped beneath the tackle box lid, exactly where he'd once told me. The important things are always hidden beneath the obvious ones. I unlocked the box. Inside was a handwritten letter and a packet of legal documents. I opened the letter first. "Erica, you always noticed what everyone else ignored. If you're reading this, then what I feared has finally happened. Don't argue with your mother. You can't defeat pride with anger. Only truth." Tears blurred my vision. Then I opened the legal papers, and everything finally made sense. Years before his death, my father had quietly placed the family house into an irrevocable trust. The home could never legally be sold, mortgaged, or used as collateral without the trustee's written approval. I checked the final page. My breath caught. The trustee wasn't my mother. It wasn't Kyle. It wasn't Vanessa. It was me, which meant the $80,000 loan against the house never should have existed. Someone had forged documents. Someone had lied to the bank. Someone had committed a felony. And suddenly, I wasn't just trying to save my mother's house anymore. I was about to expose the biggest lie our family had ever believed. The birthday gala was only days away, and this time, the truth was coming with me. The night of my mother's 60th birthday finally arrived. The Lakemont Club ballroom looked exactly the way she dreamed it would. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. A string quartet filled the room with soft music. Elegant centerpieces covered every table. Nearly 60 guests laughed, toasted champagne, and admired the decorations. To everyone else, it looked like a perfect celebration. But I knew something they didn't. Perfection built on lies never lasts. Daisy squeezed my hand as we walked into the ballroom. She wore her favorite blue dress with little pockets, the one she'd insisted on wearing because, in her words, "It makes me feel brave." I smiled. "So do you." Heads slowly turned as we entered. The same relatives who had stayed silent in the family group chat now whispered behind polite smiles. No one expected us to come, especially not my mother. For a brief moment, our eyes met. Instead of anger, I saw fear. Real fear. Because somewhere deep inside, she already knew. The truth was coming. Grant, however, looked completely relaxed. Expensive suit, confident smile, a glass of champagne in one hand. He walked around the ballroom greeting guests like a successful businessman. Listening carefully, I realized something. He wasn't celebrating. He was selling. Every conversation eventually led back to one topic: Lakemont Ridge. A once-in-a-lifetime investment. Limited opportunities. Huge returns. Several wealthy guests leaned in with interest. Exactly as he had planned. He intended to leave my mother's birthday party with even more investors, even more victims. A few minutes later, Grant stepped onto the small stage, tapped his fork against his glass. The room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we celebrate Lorraine's wonderful 60 years, I'd like to share some exciting business news." My stomach tightened. He was really doing it. He was turning my mother's birthday into a sales presentation. He began describing Lakemont Ridge, the beautiful homes, the incredible investment opportunity, the bright future. People nodded. Some even reached for business cards. Then, A calm voice interrupted him. Grant, it was Paul, the loan officer, standing quietly near the bar. He looked directly at Grant. Quick question. The Route 9 property you're talking about, isn't that still owned by the Delgado estate? Silence. Grant smiled awkwardly. There's been a misunderstanding. Paul didn't move. So there isn't actually any land? The room became painfully quiet. Grant's smile finally disappeared. Someone looked toward me, then another. Soon, every eye in the ballroom turned in my direction. One of my mother's oldest friends asked gently, Erica, you're the accountant. Is what Grant's saying true? I slowly stood, not dramatically, not angrily, just calmly, the same way I'd stood hundreds of times explaining financial reports to nervous clients. I looked around the room, then spoke. You're asking me a professional question, so I'll give you a professional answer. No, there is no Lakemont Ridge development. The land belongs to someone else. It has for more than a year. A wave of whispers spread across the ballroom. Grant immediately interrupted. She's lying. I ignored him. Instead, I opened my folder. One document at a time. The property records. The expired land option, the LLC receiving the money, the $80,000 line of credit, the bank documents, everything, piece by piece, fact by fact, no emotion, only evidence. Finally, I reached the last document, the authorization allowing the loan against my father's home. I looked directly at Grant. My mother supposedly signed this document on March 3rd. Then I looked toward the guests. On March 3rd, my mother was 60 miles away having eye surgery. I drove her there. She couldn't read, she couldn't drive, and she certainly couldn't sign legal documents. The room froze. Grant's face turned pale. There is only one possible conclusion. The signature was forged. Vanessa jumped to her feet. That's ridiculous. You're trying to destroy this family because you're jealous. Her voice echoed through the ballroom. She pointed directly at me. You're just bitter because you're still a lowly single mother. This time, nobody reacted. Nobody agreed. Nobody smiled, because the insult no longer carried any power. The truth had already taken its place. Grant quietly stepped backward, toward the exit, exactly the way guilty people do. But Paul and another guest calmly moved between him and the doors. Not aggressively, just enough to make leaving impossible. The club manager quietly disappeared into the hallway, phone already in his hand. Grant understood. There would be no escape tonight. Then, for the first time all evening, my mother walked toward me, slowly. Her champagne-colored dress suddenly seemed far too heavy for her shoulders. She stopped only a few feet away. Everyone waited. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out, not because she had nothing to say, because every excuse she'd prepared had disappeared. Finally, with tears running down her face, she whispered, I was wrong. The ballroom remained silent. She looked at Daisy, then back at me. I spent years protecting appearances, and almost lost the only family that truly loved me. She turned toward the guests. My daughter saved my home. My granddaughter never stopped loving me. I called them lowly. But tonight, I'm the one ashamed. No one applauded. No one spoke. Some moments deserve silence. I walked over to her, not because everything had been forgiven, because hatred wasn't the legacy I wanted my daughter to inherit. I quietly said, I'll protect this family, but I won't protect lies. She nodded. For the first time in my life, she accepted my boundary without arguing. Just then, Daisy gently tugged on my sleeve. She looked around the room full of adults, then smiled. In her small, confident voice, she said, We're real family. We're the ones who stayed. No speech that night, not mine, not my mother's, not Grant's, ever carried more truth than those 5 simple words. The months that followed changed everything. The bank launched a fraud investigation. The forged documents were confirmed. The fraudulent loan was cancelled. The trust my father created protected the family home exactly as he'd intended. Grant was charged with multiple counts of financial fraud. Investigators later discovered 2 other families had been targeted using the same fake investment scheme. Vanessa eventually filed for divorce. Not because the lies had finally started, because they had finally been exposed. As for my mother, she never called me lowly again. Not once. She apologized. Not perfectly, not overnight, but sincerely. And little by little, she became the grandmother Daisy had always deserved. Trust wasn't rebuilt in a single conversation. It was rebuilt one honest choice at a time. Sometimes people ask me if exposing my own family was worth it. My answer is always the same. I didn't expose my family. I exposed the lie that was destroying it. Because silence protects the guilty. Truth protects the innocent. My father understood that. Now, so do I. And every evening, when Daisy and I sit together around our small kitchen table, I remember something she once asked me. Are we real family? Today, I know the answer better than ever. Real family isn't measured by invitations. It isn't measured by money, or status, or perfect photographs. Real family is measured by who stands beside you when the truth becomes uncomfortable. And on the hardest day of my life, the people who stayed beside me weren't the loudest. They were simply the real ones.